Hong Kong. You mentioned the ETO bill, okay, and then a lot of the business here are sensing and noticing and experiencing that more and more Hong Kong is being considered as equal to China, not just only part of China, this belongs to China, but it's equal to China. Is that sentiment going to continue, or would you think there will be some modification, in terms of policies that come down from Washington, depending on the different administration, or is that pretty much a trend that's going to continue as long as the geopolitical feelings about China continues?
I think I don't really have good news on this front, because the assumption in most policy circles in Washington is that subsequent to the events of 2019 and 2020, that Hong Kong is just another city in China. So you will find many more people in Washington making that incorrect statement. It is not just another city in China. It is a special administrative region that operates largely under British law for commercial activity, has significantly greater freedoms, free access to the internet, freedom of movement, travel, etc., which are not true for the rest of the PRC. But that factually incorrect understanding is pervasive. And the distinction between the diminishment of Hong Kong's political autonomy and the situation with respect to doing business or for daily life for individuals is not widely shared. And so when people travel here, they get it, right? When they don't travel here, they don't get it. And most of them are not traveling here, and in fact, they're just gathering their opinions from other Americans and from the media. So to turn that around, it's either going to be a gradual process of new business people, new tourists coming, seeing, yeah, this feels a little different than Beijing, both as a place to do business and as a place to hang out, or as a place to live. And that gradually will accrue into a revised understanding. Or something more interesting will happen, where there's some events or some leadership type activities that reach people and change their minds. But something, it's either going to be a gradual process, or maybe it could be accelerated through advocacy, or through some more positive stories. Nicole Kidman made a TV show about Hong Kong, right? And a few people watched it. I don't think it was all that popular. I found it rather dark show. Did you watch it? I like Nicole Kidman. Everyone likes Nicole Kidman. Let's be honest. But I think there needs to be another movie that's like really popular and reaches a lot of audience, where people see Hong Kong in action, and enables to reframe their understanding. Because what the last pictures that they've seen were of violence in Hong Kong, and then they read headlines about prosecution of political figures in the city, and that's all they see. So somehow the eyeballs of now, whether that's a priority for the Hong Kong leadership or not to reach out to the United States is their decision to make. As a U.S. citizen, I'd love to see some kind of either informal or formal advocacy that would start to turn people's opinions around. And the other thing is for the Hong Kong policy environment to remain stable, and to not have restrictions on the internet, or not have any undermining of the rule of law, and maintain those strengths over the long term. And if that's the case, that's like money in the bank. It sort of starts to accrue interest in a positive way in terms of people's understanding. Sorry, kind of long answer to it.
Well, I think it tracked live. We're there for our doorknob. We're the best reaction that we got compared to some of the more really fairly negative reactions. The best reaction we got was, thank you very much for telling us about Hong Kong, but there's nothing we can do. So that is the overwhelming sentiment over there. And what you're saying is that whether or not person A or person B wins the election, this is probably continue.
Yeah.
For a while.
I mean, if you want to dig into this for a second, so the U.S. government, its relevance in this question is so I'm going to be really disloyal here. As a former U.S. government employee, but there's kind of a lot of limits to the breach of U.S. policy in this regard. So the U.S. government can issue reports telling private businesses, get out of Hong Kong because it's a terrible place. But businesses make their own decision, right? That's the way the U.S. system works. And so they have made those statements, and I think they've been kind of taken into account along with other data points, but it's not a directive situation. And then at the same time, the U.S., when I was here before, the U.S. would say frequently, you got to maintain autonomy or else, we're going to take away Hong Kong's special status, as if that's something that the U.S. could give or take away. And in actuality, once the legal changes happened in July 2020, the actual substantive impact of those policies on Hong Kong, I think, was limited. Right? There was an extradition treaty which was thrown out, and prisoner transfers were taken away. But the tax law, aviation, finance, tariffs, everything else, not anything that was business-facing wasn't actually adjusted by U.S. policy because it would be self-defeating for dealing with an economy where the U.S. actually has a trade surplus, for example. So anyways, U.S. government is important, and we got to vote. I hope everyone voted, but specific to Hong Kong, it's not really the U.S. government's situation to make better or worse that much. It's more Hong Kong itself and PRC that have to set the rules.
Dear Chair, and thank you so much for coming to speak to us, Ambassador Tong. My question is about the fact that the Hong Kong dollar is still pegged to the US dollar, and I'm wondering if this will be a significant point due to the US administration or the PRC, and when do you think this will change?
I don't think it will change, because the logic of the peg is extraordinarily strong and compelling, and it's a feasible policy which has prospered. It's been good for Hong Kong, it's been good for the PRC, and I don't think the US cares. Because more people using the dollar for finance around the world, it's just more people using the dollar for finance around the world, whether they do it in London or New York or San Francisco. It's not really all that material from a US policy perspective.
Well, maybe I'll ask a final question. Let's maybe drill down on Hong Kong. Okay, you're saying that the perception in Washington is not good about Hong Kong, and I can tell you that we work with a lot of international chambers here, the German chamber, the Japanese chamber, British chamber, et cetera, and I think the sentiment is fairly universal that maybe not to a certain degree that in Washington, but in those capitals, also the perception of Hong Kong is on the negative side. Okay, and I guess my question to you is, the Hong Kong government's narrative has been that because part of the complaint is always that Hong Kong emphasized too much on national security, and that the perception is that this is all we talk about and do here. Okay, when in fact, as you said, this is a great business city. So what is it that Hong Kong can do? Because the national security seems to be with us for a while, other than bringing a lot of people to Hong Kong, which is going to be just a drop in the bucket. What is it that Hong Kong can do to improve its perception overseas?
So, it's a tough question. Perceptions are shaped by events, and they're shaped by sort of existing realities. And so if you think about Hong Kong, perceptions of Hong Kong, I mean, don't get me wrong, there are problems in Hong Kong and how it's administered, but from a perspective of doing tourism or business or commercial activity in Hong Kong, the perceptions are more negative than the reality. And there was a big set of events in 2019 and 2020 that's being, and there's still a tail on that in terms of the prosecutions of individuals that get a lot of attention. So that's like a big event and a lasting event. So what kind of
a long COVID?
It's kind of like a long COVID, yeah. So what kind of event then could change people's perception? That's why it's kind of a silly or superficial analogy, but like a movie or something that changes people's perceptions. It could be, gosh, there's TV cameras here, so I shouldn't say this. But like some kind of event in the political, let me phrase it mysteriously. It's like an event in the political leadership of Hong Kong that creates a new symbolic focus that is more focused on win-win outcomes and less focused on adjudicating the past, would be a positive event that might help shape perceptions outside Hong Kong. But I think it's a tough slog actually, and it may be that the incremental progress approach is going to be the one that's most realistic.
Because the perception also in the boardrooms of companies, as you know.
So I'll tell you one thing that I spoke at a board meeting in Korea for a large American company whose Korea business is less than 1% of their total book, right? But they had it in Korea because they wanted to have a board meeting in Asia, right? So that company now has a really positive view of Korea. And then I spoke at one in Japan, where again a company which isn't resident in Japan brought their board meeting to Japan because they like sushi. Right? So one thing that would be useful is, why don't you have your board meeting in Hong Kong and have approach U.S. companies and say, good food, cheap, no, actually not cheap hotels, but it could be like a discount or something, right? To stay at a good hotel and some extra entertainment or something, and bringing business decision makers here on an accelerated basis, and some kind of attractive policy for that could be a good idea. I don't know. I'm not quite sure how to implement that in detail. Maybe we should make that, George, we should make that into a business plan somehow.
Okay, that's actually an advice for